and all these little cactuses and the china all around the place. And then the little boy came, and the cactuses had to go to the work, and the china had to go to the top shelf, because the center of the home was the child. And I saw for the first time that it's the child that teaches the husband and wife how to become mother and father. The need of the child pulls the heart out of the parents. A man or a woman, the gospel tells us, can have no greater love than to lay down their lives for their friends. We're inclined to think of that in a dramatic way, like martyrdom. But there's a daily quiet martyrdom of every day. Every day, you who are parents especially, but many other people too as well, lay down your lives for others, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I remember reading recently about an old nun, and I know that the Ryan report is coming out this Tuesday at 2:30, and it's looking at how children in particular were handled in institutes or institutions run by religious groups. And I'm sure it's going to be very critical, and rightly so. So I'm not saying this to reflect anything from the righteous anger that might follow that report. But it so happens that last week an old nun died, and a lady wrote in the paper an article about her. And she was a nun that under obedience found herself working in one of these orphanages. I think they got a guinea to look after a child in Ireland, whereas the equivalent place in England they got £5. They were short of money. And this lady was an orphan herself. And she remembers this old nun, and she said she loved her, and that sometimes that old nun, was a young nun then, had to sleep in a room with 4 or 5 children, because the children were ill or they had special needs and they had to be attended throughout the night. Can you imagine sleeping in a room with 5 babies? And she did that day in and day out. And this lady who witnessed all that said, isn't it a shame, with all the criticism that goes, that people like that who give everything, they're all tarred with the one brush. Love one another as I have loved you. Christ's love is lived out today, not in a Valentine's sentimental, warm, cosy, feely sort of way. But it's a love born out of deep commitment. Deep commitment to the other person. For Christians, we cannot be, otherwise we're not really Christians. We cannot be the centre of our world. We are a small and important part of our world. Our focus is meant not to be inward, but to be outward, to allow the needy to teach us how to love. I remember listening to a single person saying, well, there's married people, there's priests, there's religious, but I'm single. What about me? And then one day, from praying the scriptures and gathering together to pray with other people, she suddenly realized and heard those words, the words in today's gospel, you did not choose me, I chose you. And she began to realize that for every single person, God has a plan and a purpose, and is to embrace our plan and purpose in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Some of you about my age, or slightly younger, or slightly older, might remember Kevin O'Kelly. He used to do the religious programs in RTE. And here I was down once with students, and they were doing a seminar on alcoholism, and I was sitting beside Kevin O'Kelly. And Kevin had a little boy. He'd be a big man now if he was alive. A little boy who was what we call in Irish a Dina Ladia, or a Dulgus Ladia, a person with God, or the gift of God. And traditionally our people saw those as great gifts, of great sources of blessing, and so they are. But I remember Kevin saying, yeah, that's all true, but it's also damn hard work. To love as Christ loves in a self-emptying way is damn hard work. It's easy to be sentimental about love, but love also means seeking justice for others, speaking up for them, taking their place. People are given, life gives many people terrible crosses. God doesn't give crosses. Life, disease, injustice, hunger, they give crosses. And I marvel at times how people, and they don't see themselves as heroic or generous, how they live in the horrible circumstances in which they find themselves, and yet are able to look beyond themselves. At Mass, we receive Christ, the Christ who felt abandoned on the cross. And I thought of that image when I read and prayed the Gospel for the first time, where John tells us, Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. And I pictured that Christ being abandoned on the cross, and yet the Father loving him, the Father suffering with him, the Father going through agony because it's his Son. You know what that's like when someone in your family, particularly your children, are ill. You suffer with. There's nothing you wouldn't do. God is disturbed by our pain and by our suffering. We believe in a passionate God. And that's the way God calls us to love each other. And the message from the Gospel today is, to love that way, we have to remain in God's love. And we remain in God's love by having our eyes and our hearts opened to other people. When I was getting ready for Mass, the younger children, they have their little liturgy in the sacristy, and there's the carpet down. And I saw one of the leaders, and she was going round leaving things for the 2- and 3-year-olds in corners and under chairs. So naturally curious, I asked what. And she says, well, it's today's Gospel, and we're leaving red hearts. So it's for the children to find a heart and then to give it away. That's how Christ loves. With open heart, he gives it away. This is my body, given for you. He says to us in Holy Communion, body of Christ. And we say, yes,